Welcome to the Brain People Podcast, a show where four mental health experts team up to bring you practical tools for overcoming mental health challenges. The Brain People don't replace your doctor or therapist, but we will give you some extra tools to help you on your journey. So join us as we fight mental illness, one episode at a time.
Welcome to the Brain People Podcast. I'm Amanda Anguish, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Stacy Bartley. Such a pleasure to be here with you.
Yes. Now, we started our conversation, I like to say that, on episode 6, we talked about relationships. Actually, we talked about depression, but the relationship with the depressed person and how we could better that and improve that and stuff. And so now we're going to continue the conversation in a slightly different way. This is our Valentine's Day episode. So we're going to talk about relationships, but not just romantic relationships. We're going to talk about all kinds of relationships because not everybody has a specific romantic relationship that they're in at this time. But we want to just help people with their relationships. So as we start out, what are some of the things that you'd like to talk about a little bit too today?
Well, with your introduction, the first place my mind went, so I'll just follow that track of thinking, is as a kid, I love Valentine's Day. Like I remember having wonderful memories about and around Valentine's Day. And it's very different, or it was very different for me than it was and how we hold it now in our society. Like now it kind of brings up, it is about romantic relationships. And for many of us, it highlights the fact of what I don't have or what I wish I had. And so it becomes this, quite frankly, kind of disappointing, right?
Yeah.
And then we do our traditional go out to dinner and get our flowers and our box of chocolates. And we check the box and say, okay, we've handled that for Valentine's Day.
We did Valentine's Day.
And I just think there's so much more to it that we miss that's fundamentally important to our relationships. I believe that we all have a romantic relationship, and the one with ourself is the one that's going to last a lifetime, and the one that we probably need to create a little more pleasure and romance around.
That's a good thing to talk about. Like, what do we mean by romance? Because that's an interesting word, and you just used it in a way that most people don't think about.
Romance is anything that is novel and enjoyable and playful, and it's out of the ordinary. That's what makes it romantic. It's something that touches me or makes me laugh or is a surprise, and I can do all of that with myself.
So that means some relationships that are what most people would consider romantic because it's a couple or something isn't necessarily romantic then at some points in that relationship because they're not doing those novel, those playful things and stuff like that.
Well, and usually how that shows up in my particular office, I'd love to hear how it shows up in yours, is I need them to be more romantic. And it could be the him to her or her to him or her to her, him to him. I mean, it doesn't really matter, but somebody in the relationship is longing for more romance. And what we mean by that is think of me, surprise me, do something special for me, acknowledge me, all those wonderful things that we all long for secretly inside, but very few of us raise our hands and say, I need a little more of that. And so I always say, well, then create it. If you want more romance in your relationship, then do it. You create what it is you want.
Yeah, that reminds me, when I was not married, I realized that I didn't have anything to do for Valentine's Day, but there was this big thing made up about it. So I would have parties on Valentine's Day because I realized that's the only way I'm going to have somebody in my life on this day is if I create something for myself. So I would have parties, Valentine's Day parties. And ironically, some of my couple friends would come to that instead of doing Valentine's Day together.
Yes, which brings me back to my memory as a child. We would start preparations for Valentine's Day days before Valentine's Day. And there would be the construction paper and the doilies and the stickers.
That.
Do you remember those days?
Yes.
And you pull the markers out and you would make your Valentine list that included your friends, secondary parents in the community that were significant, important to you. And my mom would even each have us put a little Valentine holder on our bedroom door so that we could give Valentine's Day to our siblings, you know, and the family. And the whole premise was to let them know this one day that you care and that you love them and that you acknowledge or remember things or how you associate with them. And of course, you'd write it down. And then those we would deliver around the neighborhood, of course, would be like a bit of door ditching, right? You throw the Valentine on the door, you'd knock on the door and then get the heck of a dodge, which when I think about that now, I think, gosh, there's even some brilliance in that because sometimes it's uncomfortable to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And here I've just kind of poured my heart out for you. I don't want to be there when you read it, nor does the person want to have to respond in a certain way. So what a brilliant tradition that was, where you pour your heart out in a little Valentine Day, you put it on the porch, you knock on the door, you get the heck out of Dodge, and then they get to enjoy how you feel about them in their own special way. There's no pressure for anybody to have to show up and appear any awkward way. And I wish we could bring those back, you know?
You know, that this is like a whole new phenomenon we need to start is like go around your neighborhood and drop off Valentine's Day to your neighbors. I actually did that when I was in my 30s. I thought, you know, it's sad that we don't give these Valentine's Day cards to each other and stuff anymore like we used to. Now it's focused when you become an adult. It's like for one person, maybe your kids or something like that. I know my mom has sent us Valentines before, but we should do this for all the people we love in our lives and like...
And bring back the true purpose of Valentine's, right? It doesn't have to just be for couples. It is really a day and a moment where we can acknowledge and appreciate the people who are in our lives and that have that special place in our hearts, and that we get to tell them that because we all need more of that. Tell me somebody on the planet right now that doesn't need more of, oh, somebody does think about me. I really have made a difference in that person's life. I really am special there. And even though we might know it, it's like we don't hear it enough. You know,
yeah. And in this day and age when, you know, media, text messaging and all that stuff, like to actually get a card or to have somebody drop by something like a treat or whatever, that would be just the nicest thing for somebody.
Yeah. My grandkids and I still have that tradition. And we're trying to now outsmart each other, but I still love their little homemade Valentines and vice versa, right? That we get to go through and go, oh, you know, little moments and little memories that come up in those Valentines are just incredibly precious. And so I guess that would be the first place I'd love to start with, you know, building relationships is acknowledgement and appreciation go a long, long way. And Valentine's Day is a perfect day to let the people in your life know that you love them, that you care about them, and share a special little thought or memory with them and put it in a card or make a card even better.
Yeah.
And drop it on their porch and run and let them enjoy what it is you've just shared with them.
And, you know, I think that's kind of a needed excuse because sometimes it's really hard to be vulnerable, which is one of the aspects of relationships that is needed more so in this day and age and at any point in time, really. But is that vulnerability? And Valentine's Day is a great excuse to do that. Like you wouldn't naturally just feel like giving somebody a card. That just seems very awkward. But to have Valentine's Day as an excuse to give one, then it's like, oh, I'm acknowledging you on this day that we're supposed to do stuff like that.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that you brought up vulnerability because I'm sure, like you, I get that in my office a lot. Like, oh, Stace, that's so vulnerable. Like that? Yeah. Like, let's just talk about vulnerability and maybe a little bit why it's so scary to really share our hearts and express what it is we want. The fear generally comes from a place of being manipulated from it. Like if I know what you really want, then I can use it against you, or I can coerce you or engage you in doing things that I want you to do that you don't necessarily want to do, but I can use this as the leverage stick. However, if we have the ability to use our voices and say no, we don't have to be concerned about being vulnerable anymore, because if somebody tries to use it against me, I can just as easily say, yeah, I do want that, but I'm not doing that. I'm sorry. That's not okay for me. And essentially it puts you in this place where you're unmanipulatable from that happenstance. People can't flip it on you. And the other aspect of it is, I would say, what's our alternative? You find that when you work with relationships, the way through any kind of a difficult conflict is by being vulnerable. And it's kind of like how we set ourselves up in not being vulnerable is we're going to get defensive and then we're going to make up a story about what the other person should do or what I'm entitled to receive in order to address this conflict.
Yeah.
So let's see, that's probably 1, 2, 3 days that have gone by that I'm spun up, upset, hot mess. And then I spend another 4, 5, and 6 days thinking about, okay, how am I going to break the ice? How are we going to step in and have this conversation? And then it's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 later where I've tried a few times. I put a toe in the water, didn't go so well, and we rinse and repeat. And so the next thing you know, it's been 30 days and I've been hanging out in this hot mess place emotionally and not knowing how to resolve it. We spend a tremendous amount of time suffering instead of being able to realize that if you could just get clear about what it is that hurt your feelings and say so, and if you could just get clear about what it is you wanted or was hoping to get out of that interaction and allow the other person to do the same, we could have probably gotten through it in like 30 minutes to an hour, tops 2 days, and you would have just saved yourself 29 days of suffering unnecessarily. But in order to get that benefit, you're going to need to be vulnerable. Like that is the way through.
I think what you're talking about when I hear you talking about vulnerability is I think there needs to be a certain element of willingness to deal with conflict. That's part of being vulnerable too, is like I'm willing to feel all the feels that come with confronting an issue, talking to a person about what's really going on versus like, well, I'm just going to pretend and wait to see if it goes away and that sort of thing. And so being vulnerable also means being vulnerable to conflict.
Absolutely. And that's normal. To any of the listeners out there, that is so normal. And you're never going to not be without it. Speak to this because I can tell you guys.
Every relationship requires the ability to go through conflict. We absolutely need to be able to confront conflict because I think that's one of the things I see in my clients is they think that conflict means something's wrong. But conflict is often quite the opposite. It's the realization that I'm growing and you're growing and we do want to grow together, but I might be seeing myself go a little bit this way and you might be seeing yourself go a little bit that way. And how can we get back on track together without confronting those things and going through conflict? And I know this is kind of, people have heard this over and over before, but in the Chinese culture in the language that, crisis is actually is 2 words put together and it means danger and opportunity. And so when we have a crisis situation in our relationship, something happens, I disagree with you, you disagree with me. It's an opportunity for us to come together to remedy that situation. And if we're not willing to do the conflict part of it, then we might continue to go in the opposite directions or, whatever.
And that's exactly how we grow apart. And I would just add to that, we all come from a different sets of perspective and expectations and experience. And so sometimes I think we feel our partners, especially when I really care about them or we consider ourselves to be soulmates, et cetera, bound by our religious beliefs. There's lots of things that make us feel like, okay, we got this, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're not feeling or thinking or behaving the way that you used to with me. And I panic and I start to make up a whole bunch of things about that. Yes. And to realize that is, like you're saying, that is totally normal. And your partner doesn't get where you're coming from. They don't. They're too busy dealing with their own hot mess, right?
Yeah.
Inside of themselves. And so oftentimes that disappointment is just a misunderstanding of how we work as human beings and what expectations are that are rooted in reality. And so when we expect them to feel the way I feel or think the way I see it or to be able to show up and be what I call matchy, that's going to set us up for a disappointment every single time. And also it robs us of the opportunities to grow and explore and expand our perspectives and who it is we have the capacity to be as human beings. And I think that's the point of relationships overall. Like if you want to put your personal growth on steroids, just go ahead and get into a relationship.
Yeah.
It will take care of everything. And then once you're in one, stay in one. There's these ever evolving places where we're going to have to grow, and we're going to have to expand our perspective and our experience, and we're going to have to learn how to include somebody in our world, even though we don't get it and we don't understand it and it doesn't make any sense to us. But we have to allow them to teach us, and I be willing to do that work and effort on my own part as well, so that exchange and that connection and that growth can happen together.
Yeah, it sounds like what you're saying, that maybe we should feel kind of sad for ourselves when we're at that place where we say, I just don't want to deal with people, or I don't want to deal with relationships and that sort of thing. So I'm just going to stay by myself and not have to deal with it. That would be equivalent to like saying, I don't want to go to the gym. I don't want to grow. I don't want to get muscles in areas that I'm not wanting to deal with the work to do.
Well, and here's the reality. Like sometimes we shouldn't be in a relationship because dealing with me is a full-time job and it's all I can handle. And that's totally okay to be where you are. I have singles ask me often, when is the best time for me to jump back in and get going? Let's say I've helped them through a divorce or something. And now they're like, okay, when should I think about dating again? And I say, anytime you feel like you're ready to take on more, because that's what a relationship is going to give you. Not just more of the good stuff, but more of everything.
Yeah.
More opportunities, more growth, more conflict, more challenges, and yes, more love, more support, hopefully, safety to express and explore more of who you are. It just gives you more. And if you feel like you have enough on your plate right now, then please stay there, because that natural inkling of, I think I'm ready for more, it's going to come. I'm ready. I just want to meet somebody. That's how that starts to show up. And you go, you're ready.
Yeah. So what are some of the other things that we should keep in mind with relationships too? We've talked about vulnerability. We've talked about conflict. What do you think another aspect of relationships is that we need to consider?
Defensiveness.
No. Okay.
Yeah. The butt kicker for all of us.
I don't want to hear what you're saying right now.
Yes. How could you? I
That's
can't believe
me.
You went there.
I don't do that. At least the way you're saying I do it.
Let me teach and preach to you about all I know on the topic. Let me diagnose you, tell you what your problem is, and then you'd better do it my way.
I don't do that ever.
Me either. What about hold a grudge or make you pay or blame you? You should know better. And when the person's like, defensiveness is the kicker. It is really the thing that destroys us and our relationships at the end of the day. And it's hard to stay out of, right? I mean, we can find ourselves there in 22 seconds.
It sounds like that's another aspect of taking on more when you take on a relationship, is you take on also the potential to learn things about yourself that you don't want to face as well. And that's what makes us defensive, because I'm not ready to hear those things about myself. And I do really well on my own. And why do you have to tell me who you see I am? And I now realize I am, but I didn't want to face that until you just said that.
Exactly. Like those are hard things, right? And we think that when our buttons get pushed, in our world, we call it triggered. But when our buttons get pushed, we think that our person should know that that's pushing my buttons. And how dare you go there, that they should know better. And I like the metaphor that I use often in my practice of, let's suppose right now you have a headache, right? You have a pain in your physical body and you have a headache. And how we tend to handle this on the emotional side is, I would say, I have a headache. I can't believe I had a headache. Is this headache your fault? You should know better than to give me a headache. You should know that this headache and I have a headache. What are you going to do about it? And I'm not going to do X, Y, Z until my headache's gone. And when you think about it in those terms, you realize the person, your partner, doesn't have the headache. They don't get your headache. They don't feel your headache. They don't understand how to remedy your headache. And what they're wanting, or the best aspect we could set them up as to be supportive to you, is for you to say, what would really help me with my headache? I have a headache. claim it, own it.
Yeah.
You know what would really help me with my headache? I love a glass of water and 2 Excedrin. Or maybe it's a cup of coffee and a chocolate donut. Or maybe it's 2 Tylenol and a grapefruit juice. I mean, we all have these little remedies that we know work for us, but think about the ability to get your needs met and stay out of defensiveness if you could just own it. This is happening inside of me.
Yeah.
And here's what I think I need in order to remedy it. Would you be willing to do that?
Yeah.
And then your person has the option to choose in or not, you know? Yeah. I mean, how many of us, if we know our person and we understand they're hurting, wouldn't go, heck yeah, I'll get you a glass of water and a couple of Excedrin if that's all you need for your headache? And I'm not supposed to come up with a headache. I'm sorry you have a headache, but I don't know what to do about your headache. And you're the one with the headache. So how can I help you with it?
And I don't have to be the one, if you're owning it too, I'm just talking about the other person. I don't have to try to convince you anymore. So I'm not going to be in that place of like, no, really, you do have a headache. Don't you notice? You know, and so I don't have to keep doing that. Now I get to go in the place of supporting you versus like trying to convince you of that headache.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of, we brought that up when we were showcasing signs of defensive-ness, you know. It is just like somebody, I know you have a headache. You have a headache. I can see it. It's all over your face. And you're like, look, I don't have a headache, but I do now. I have a headache right now because you won't get off my back. And then it's like, see, I always knew you had a headache. See, there it is.
Or I'm just thinking how this looks in like my sessions. Like, you're angry. No, I'm not. And then you get angry because
like,
you're trying to. Okay, I am now. And they got what they wanted because I just went into that place of being angry. And so, yeah, all the defensiveness it does is pull us apart even more versus bring us together.
Well, and the sad thing about defensiveness, I think the net result is it has this boomerang effect where if I allow myself to show up in ways that I don't feel good about, then I know that. And not only have I allowed myself to maybe say and do some things to a person that I say I love, that I feel bad about, but it really dismantles me and my own self-concept and confidence and creates a lot of self-doubt that then I grapple with because, as a client once said, this relationship is turning me into a monster of myself, right? And as it continues on and I continue to show up in this defensive way, I feel terrible about who I am and who I'm becoming, you know? And that becomes the catch-22 that we find ourselves in. And the more we hurt, the more we feel like we have to take it out on somebody. And the worse I feel about myself because I'm going to pay the ultimate price for that.
I think, you know, as you're talking about that, defensiveness seems to come from a place of looking at myself the wrong way too when somebody says that, rather than looking at it like, wow, you're being helpful and showing me areas where I can grow and change. It's looking at it as a place of shame, like I must be a bad person, therefore I have to defend my reputation now, versus, oh, I can just listen and use this as an opportunity to grow or grow with you as we talk about it even.
Yes, and the ability to be flexible and to accept that maybe somebody sees you in this light, but remember that you at the end of the day get to make the final call in regards to what was true for you and what wasn't. So even if you're being accused of something that you know you didn't do, you know, it's kind of like that knowing inside of yourself, I didn't do it, but why do you think I did? Let's explore that so that we can all learn from this. Recently, and I just want to point out here how normal this is. Like you and I spend a lot of time in this conversation, like our lives have been dedicated to it well beyond 10,000 hours, right?
Yeah,
and I always say I do this work because I need to be reminded more than most.
I say I do this work to let me know what's like normal versus, oh no, it's just me, you know?
Yeah. So very similar there. And so you would think that because we're in that conversation a lot, that we do this perfectly. Like I don't have problems of defensiveness in my relationship, right?
Every time I do it the right way.
And that's such a lie because we are in the human experience just like everybody else is, right? And so that just showcases how culpable we all are to find ourselves in places of defensiveness and conflict and those kinds of things. So the goal is to get through it quickly, efficiently, and effectively so we don't spend that 30 days suffering, that we get through it as quickly as possible and be done with it. So my husband and I are on the way to axe throwing and we're meeting a group of friends. And guess what? We are running late. Surprise, surprise. Okay. So we're already spun up, right? Because they're going to give our lane away and our friends are there waiting on us. So I'm texting the friends. My husband's driving the car, and he, at that moment, gets a call from a brother who's having some health challenges, and he wants our thoughts and input and what should he do. And so now we're trying to support a person, text our friends that we're running late. It's going to be fine. We'll be there, and driving all at the same time as we're both getting pretty spun up about being late and, all that stress that comes with it. I am from Utah. I do not profess to be good at directions here in California. And in fact, I am absolutely certain that addresses here in California are completely decorative. They mean nothing. Where I come from, there's a grid. Like an address actually means something. So in the decade plus I've been here, I've had to kind of get comfortable with that. But as we're driving and I'm trying to assist my husband, I can see the intersection of the name of the street and the 49 here in Auburn. And so I see that there's this exit that has that name on it.
Yeah.
My husband's a real estate appraiser. He knows these streets like the
everywhere.
back of his hand. Yeah. And so because he's distracted trying to support his brother, I say, go to the next exit. Okay, so he goes to the next exit. And the minute we get off the exit, he realizes, yes, that exit has the same name, but it also meanders you through the hills. And we just added about 15 minutes to our time. And we should have got off about the exit prior.
Yeah.
And immediately he turns to me and goes, why do I ever listen to you about directions? Like, that's the stupidest thing I would ever do. I should have known better. Right. And I'm like, that kind of hurt my feelings. And I just said, whoa, wait a minute. I didn't do this intentionally. I really could see it in my mind's eye. And then it's silent. It's just silent. As we kind of all start to both of us regather, like, okay, what are we going to do with this? What's the next step?
The replay goes on.
And I just said, babe, that was kind of hurtful.
Yeah.
And he goes, I'm sorry, honey. I was just being a jerk. Now, here, we're going to just drive through this. And it was put to bed like that fast. Something that could have derailed our entire evening was just, how did we get through that? I was able to express that hurt my feelings.
Yeah.
We were all able to pause and go, what do we want out of this? What do we need to say? What do I need to take responsibility for? As opposed to defend the reason that you really don't know directions, which is true. I can own that one. And that, yes, we're all overreacting because of the situation. And the minute we can say, I was just being a jerk. I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. And I'm sorry. I should have known better. I was sincerely trying to get us there and be helpful. And then we both were able to learn something. Where does that road take us to where it is we thought we were going?
Yeah.
And we can all grow and benefit from it as a result, right?
So you're saying that's normal.
That's so normal. And I
think a lot of people are going to leave just going, oh, maybe we're not as bad off as we thought we were.
And I can give you another one on the flip side. Short stories, I'm the one that's driving, and I'm more intent on picking off my sunburned skin than paying attention to where I'm going. And I start to veer off into oncoming traffic. And of course, my husband freaks out. And I'm like, why did you do that? Watch where you're going, right? And it's like, silence. And I think that's the first step. And that's the first step I always teach my clients. Like, look, if things are escalating, your best next step is just to pause and breathe and figure out, right? And allow our brains to kind of catch up with what's going on emotionally. That's the tricky part about emotions.
I call those adult timeouts. I just take a timeout because sometimes, say the argument escalates even more and it keeps going and you don't even know what you're arguing anymore. Sometimes it's just better to say, hey, I need 10 minutes just to gather myself. I'm not sure what's happening here. And I'll come back and we'll finish this when I can gather myself and my thoughts. Because when you're in the throes of the emotion, sometimes you're not going to say anything helpful. So it's better to take a time out and then come back later.
Yeah, we drove through the intersection. It was silent for a minute. And I said, I can understand why you were afraid. I wasn't paying attention. And he said, I wish I could have found a better way to let you know.
Yeah.
And it's over. It's done. Right. But you have to take that pause. It's so important. And literally, when we understand that our brains can only process so much of what we're feeling, that it does take some time to kind of catch up.
Yeah.
I feel it all right now, but I don't make any sense of it. If I give myself that pause, it gives my brain that chance to kind of go, well, I'm feeling this and I want this. And this was what was hurtful. And this was what made me angry. And now let's talk about that. Otherwise, it's just an overload. And you're right. We're going to be fighting about things and we don't even understand why we're fighting. We're just giving airtime and reaction to the emotion. And it makes no sense. So that's why after the fact you go, oh, why did I say that? I'm so sorry. That was
Yeah.
terrible. Or why didn't I say that? That would have been a brilliant comeback. It's because that's has caught up, right? I call it the space between the notes makes the music, just like music theory, right?
That's really neat. Well, I'm learning so much from this.
Me too.
So I think let's do some wrap up here. So what are some things that you'd like to, share with us as we wrap up? I know you have there's something specifically that we talked about in our last segment. I think that would be a nice transition here too. What do you want to share with us?
Yeah. So I guess the summary, and you helped me with this in the conversation, because I too have, it's always such a great reminder, to come and to spend some time with you, Amanda. I want you to know that's always a get-to.
We're glad to have you here.
The first thing is that conflict's going to happen. It's normal. Relationships give us more. They give us plenty of opportunities to learn about ourselves and our person, and that's kind of the sweet spot. That's the part that gives the connection and the joy that we're all kind of longing for.
The romance too. We don't want to forget the romance, that it's not just about romantic relationships, but it's the actual romance, means the novelty, the pleasure, like including positivity and lightness to the relationship too. It doesn't all have to be heavy and hard.
Well, and if it's just all heavy and hard, why are we going to do it?
Yeah.
Why are we going to do the effort part? And then we can put our problems on the shelf and have a good time, and they'll seemingly wait for us. I've never seen them evaporate.
They'll show up again, just in case you think you'll forget.
And that defensiveness is kind of the culprit that kind of breaks us down, and we can all, fall a culprit to that. And then pausing is the remedy for that. Like it's the best option you have or the adult timeout, right?
Yeah.
Let me just kind of sit and be with myself and see if I can figure out what that remedy might be for my emotional headache. Because until I can do that, I'm probably not going to get my need met, and my person's not going to know how to support me. And sometimes stepping into that after the pause, that's difficult. Like I get that I got to pause.
Re-entry.
The re-entry can be a bit bumpy. And so one of my favorite techniques for that I did share on a previous podcast, we kind of dove
number
into
6
is a little thing I call fairy dust.
Yes.
And fairy dust is just my way of helping you remember what I'm about to say, because if I were to call it some clinical term, you wouldn't. It would go right over your head. But fairy dust is a great way to remind ourselves that we care. And it's a great way to remind our person that I care about you, even though we might be in this conflict that we're trying to resolve.
Yeah.
And so the first piece of fairy dust is acknowledge and appreciate your person. Like, what do they do for you? What is it you love about them? And what has usually gotten us so spun up is the fact that we care about this relationship and that person so much.
Yeah.
And so a great reentry is I care about you and I care about us. And I just got so worked up over this. I just want you to know that. And then the second piece would be everybody wants to be heard. That's a very validating experience for us. So please hear me out. And then I promise I'll give you time to be heard too. I want to hear what you have to say. And it's going to be okay to be different than mine. And the last one is reassure your partner that they do matter to you, that this relationship matters to you, and that's why we're going to try and resolve this, because we all get to a place where we can start running scared, especially when we're stuck in defensiveness. And I can make up that you don't care, and that's why you said that, and I'm not important to you, and you don't care about our relationship and what happens next. And that's just simply not the truth. It's also going to help us regulate ourselves and not say and do some things that demonstrate I don't care when really I do. And so just to recap that, open a conversation up. That reentry point is reminding them that you love them, that this relationship is important to you, and that you want this to go well. And just please hear me out, and then I'll give you a chance to be heard too.
Yeah.
And then,
I think we all want to be on the same team, like we really want to have teammates on our team, and just reminding ourselves and each other that we're on the same team is a good place. Yeah.
And then the next step would just be own it, name it. I feel, because of this, this is your fault, or I blame you. That's just going to take us back into defensiveness. But so set the stage with fairy dust, and then just step into it. I'm feeling, or I'm needing, I'm noticing. Take responsibility for it, and then name it as best you can.
I think it's okay to be afraid sometimes, but not to be afraid of being afraid. That, I can go through this. We've done it before. We can do it again, or maybe I've never done this before. And so I want to try it this time, and I don't have to succeed at my first try, but I'm just willing to continue with it is something that's really important in relationships too. And I think that's what you're saying is that, we're all just working at this, and we don't always get it right the first time, but we're willing to stick with it and keep going. And
yeah, I like to think of conversations to resolve conflict as rounds, because every round or every time we go around, we're going to learn something new about ourselves and our person. I think the worst relationship advice on the planet was don't ever go to bed mad. And I think, oh, please go to bed mad. We can pick this up in the morning because otherwise it's just going to turn into a wear down fest,
Yeah, sometimes sleeping on it too is
so
the best
helpful.
way to relieve the mad.
And we think that we have this one shot to resolve this problem. No, you don't. You can take 50 at it. You can take 100 at it. And just remember, every round of practice is going to teach you something new. And so eventually it will sort itself out as long as you stay with it,
Yeah.
Have some ease about it.
Well, thank you, Stacy, so much for joining me today and for being here. And we'll have to not wait for another 40-something episodes to have you back.
And happy Valentine's, everybody.
Happy
Everybody can go be romantic now.
You can have romance with whomever.
Even with yourself.
Well, I hope you have a good Valentine's Day, you and your husband, but you and anyone else too that you choose to share your love with. And I hope everyone out there listening to has a great Valentine's Day as well. Thanks for listening. To hear more episodes, find us on social media, or support us financially, visit thebrainpeoplepodcast.com.